The title of my presentation, A Values-Based Approach to Ethics Education. And this is a relatively new framework, and I'm actually very happy that we have all healthcare professionals in the room, because this is really where it started. This is where it's used most often, even though it is applicable to other disciplines. The heart of this ethics education software tool really lies in nursing and in other allied health fields. So this is a nice audience for us to talk here today. Essentially, the values-based approach to education emphasizes the fact that values play a central role in our decision-making. And it's a different way of thinking because most of the time we rely on our evidence-based practice, and the evidence guides us to what is the best decision. However, that doesn't always work because we have an imperfect world where logic and complexities often intertwine. So we must complement the evidence with our values to come to a good decision. And that's essentially the basis of this education tool. Hey, Brian. So my objectives here today, I'm going to talk really briefly here about how ethics fits into our curriculum and why this is important for us to all consider. I'm going to try to introduce the tool to you by giving you some theoretical framework, why, how the tool is used. I want to demonstrate to you how I use it in my classroom, and also explain I've done 2 formal research studies on the use of the tool and its efficacy, and finally end with some potential uses and some future plans for using the tool. So of course we know that at the heart of our strategic plan, we have several values that apply right into ethics. So ethics is across the curriculum. It's integrated into every professional practice. We have our code of ethics, but it does align with Marymount nicely as it fits into the Catholic identity. It fits into our emphasis on intellectual curiosity. And this particular tool is going to be a great way to foster global connections. So it buys into the global perspective piece as well. And so just briefly here, I want to speak about the challenges of incorporating ethics into our classroom. Now, most of us are not philosophy professors. We don't have a very strong background in ethics, even though it is incorporated into every practice. So ethics in general has been very difficult to not only teach, but assess as well, mostly because those outcomes that we're looking for are often intangible and difficult to really measure. So variation in teaching does exist in the literature in terms of how we approach ethics education. First, one of the more common types of education is that we teach from a theoretical perspective. So we talk about the different theories there, and we try to get students to understand that and essentially measure that by asking them to then incorporate that knowledge and concepts on some type of assessment, which is nice from a kind of knowledge standpoint, but the problem is when we try to apply those theories to real life, and that there exists the evidence practice gap. The second approach to teaching ethics education is the approach that there is a right or wrong answer to ethical problems. And of course, we can prescribe our answers to our code of ethics, but that doesn't really consider diverse populations, and it may lead to contentious discussions in the classroom when we start to talk about this black and white, right or wrong issues without considering full context. The last challenge of teaching in ethics education is that if we approach it from trying to have students understand the ethical process and try to kind of incorporate our theories and how we come to making decisions, again, that's problematic because translating that knowledge into real life situations can be difficult, and this may actually alienate some students, especially if we use those esoteric sounding theory names and kind of some of the terms in ethics. So perhaps a more effective way to teach ethics education is a self-reflective curriculum that really does emphasize that students can come to a good decision based upon their experience and their values and using the literature. And so this is a new approach, and it's developed by this gentleman, David Seedhouse, who is the founder of the Values Exchange software tool that I'm going to talk about here in just a second, as well as he's a researcher in the field of values-based ethics education. And so this approach is not necessarily about the transference of knowledge, but it really is about recognizing that the decisions we make are not in a vacuum, and that the decisions we make have that subjective component that often includes values, situational context, resource constraints, and especially for us in the healthcare field, the personal wishes of our client or our patient. So it's not just there's a black and white answer, but we have to really take into consideration the subjectiveness of decision making. This doesn't mean that ethical issues and decision-making neglects critical thinking. When I think about how I want to have my students think about ethics, it would be great if at the end of our ethics education piece that students will have an increased awareness of ethical issues as they present themselves. So just being able to recognize that this is an ethical issue, and then being able to consider a range of possibilities, a range of choices that they can make, and then making a decision and robustly justifying it based upon evidence as well as values. So those three processes there really speak to the heart of this kind of more self-reflective curriculum. So we have the opportunity here to explore different innovative teaching approaches to ethics education, and web-based learning is kind of a new technology that's used. Just a quick slide on some of the benefits of using web-based technology. Students tend to prefer it. They see it as a very acceptable learning tool. It allows for a lot of flexibility and participation. Students have reported that they've enjoyed having the ability to reflect, to being able to go back and answer questions, to read others, to spend some time critically thinking in the online forum. And studies have shown that there's not too much difference between the online environment and a brick and mortar classroom. So the Values Exchange is this web-based technology tool, and it really does provide a framework for justifying decisions and for exploring the decision-making process. It is a process-oriented approach. It reflects the view that a good decision is one that is robustly justified, and that students can come to this decision based upon what they learn in a classroom as well as the experiences and values that they bring. It was developed by David Seedhouse. He was at, in New Zealand, the Auckland University of Technology, pretty recently in 2004. And his purpose for developing this was to create an online environment that fosters international connections, but we can also start to engage in dialogue that allows us to think more critically, deeper, and to kind of recognize our values that we share across disciplines. Oh, Lord. Okay. Thank you, President Schenk. No worries. Of course, of course. All right, where was I? Okay, so I do want to talk a little bit about evidence-based practice here, because that really is a gold standard in a lot of our teaching here. And so the values-based process doesn't neglect evidence-based practice. Oftentimes we see those two as kind of butting heads against each other. So evidence-based practice, as we know, requires using the most relevant, current, available resources to try to come to some decisions. However, we all are aware that there is that evidence practice gap that exists, that it is difficult sometimes to translate that evidence into practice because of the situational context and those other factors that are involved in clinical decision making, as we spoke about before. It is said that we greatly overestimate the role of evidence in logic and sometimes greatly underestimate the influence of our values in decision making. So evidence-based practice does have a role here. The values-based approach, on the other hand, really speaks to making our values transparent. So what is the underlying feelings, beliefs that we have when we talk about decision making? And that middle point really resonates with me, that this values-based approach allows students to reflect on their beliefs and personal values in the context of the knowledge and evidence that they have appraised. So once they receive that evidence, once they're able to process that, they kind of negotiate the balance between what they read and what they've learned with their own personal beliefs to come to a good decision. So hopefully, gaining an understanding of these various factors at play, not only the evidence out there, but our personal beliefs and values, can help us and better prepare students to make a better decision once they get out into their practice or workplace. So when we think about values and evidence, a good way to think about it is this quote by Fulford that says, "Values and evidence are the 2 feet on which all decisions in health and any other context stand." So that there's not one or the other, you need both to have a nice balance between the two. So it's one approach that this ethical software tool takes. And so that is the values-based theory of decision making. So I do want to show you a quick Vimeo. It's a 3-minute film on this values exchange before I introduce it. I think it's pretty relevant and short. And it's a Vimeo. And even though it is somewhat simple, it certainly does not reflect the simplicity of making decisions from a values-based approach.
Jane, Beth, and Jim are members of Organization X. Organization X has written its core values into a mission statement. Jane, Beth, and Jim each buy into this mission. And when it comes to real decisions, they rarely agree. Politics and personal values kick in. What's the problem? While Jane, Beth, and Jim genuinely believe in their organization's values, deep down their personal values are rich and complex. Everyone's are. Our values shape our thoughts and behaviors. When we can't see these properly, we misunderstand each other. People take sides, resentments form, authentic communication suffers, which means the organization suffers too. This is where the Values Exchange comes in. The Values Exchange is an online thinking community where every issue or idea that matters to Organization X can be openly debated. It's much more than a chat room or social network. It's software specifically designed to make values transparent. The Values Exchange is a valuable tool for any organization, from businesses, schools, and universities to healthcare and nonprofits. It's a creative space for everyone, from CEO or principal to the most junior member. Anyone can post as many issues as they like, as often as they like. Choose from 5 formats: discussions, polls, surveys, think screen cases, and digital sharing boards. As soon as the responses are in, everyone can begin to explore the results. It's the depth of information contained in these results that will allow members of your organization to really begin to understand each other in a deeper, more meaningful way. With Values Exchange, it's about seeing beneath the surface, like X-ray glasses that see into a person's thinking. A person's expressed values may look one way on the surface. It can look like we agree, but we can each be thinking in very different ways. It is only by understanding this that the most constructive debate can begin. The Values Exchange system can be applied to any decision, offering personal learning and powerful analytics at the same time. With Values Exchange, members can begin to see and understand each other more clearly, opening us up to shared ideas, new learning, and creative teamwork. When values are transparent, trust is heightened, and everyone's thoughts can be explored more closely. The Values Exchange builds tolerance of difference and allows all ideas to bloom. Each Values Exchange is private and branded to your organization. Your Values Exchange can even be connected to multiple organizations if required. Motivate and empower your members to achieve their creative potential and help them build and deliver your organization's ideals effectively on a daily basis through the Values Exchange. Contact us at vxcommunity.com or take a test drive on one of our free to the public.
Okay. All right, so let's talk about the Values Exchange and what it looks like. And here is a screen capture. I can actually show you the website live. It's software you just log into with your name. Registration is free. I should say that Marymount does pay a license fee that we've been afforded to do the last 3 years. It's a nominal fee. It's very small, but it's available for us to use. And you could see here that this screenshot includes our Marymount University logo. In fact, the website is marymount.vxcommunity.com. So there is that strong connection to Marymount, which is really nice. And I certainly can provide that to you later as well, because you can play around with this. You yourself can register. In fact, when I asked to do this session, I requested a computer lab. And so last night when I was preparing my presentation, I decided to check out which computer lab I would be in and saw that I wasn't going to be in. So that changed my evening plans. I got to stay up and watch the Mets lose, though. I'm from New York, so that was a great time to be readjusting my presentation and watching the Mets lose all at once. But I did want to give you the opportunity to play around because you can register. We have this site, we pay a fee, and that really is the best plan. So as kind of a side note, I'd be happy if you're interested in using this in a classroom or exploring it more. I'd be happy to sit with you and go through it with you because there's a little bit of a learning curve, but it's pretty intuitive. In fact, we look at this homepage here, and you can see that it's somewhat Facebook-like. Students say it's pretty highly intuitive, that they're kind of used to this cacophony of noise and they're able to navigate it. But we do have the license. It is Marymount on the website address. And so this is what it looks like. And students are presented with a number of different cases and polls and different activities that they can engage in. This is a public site. We can make private groups, but students on the public site can click on any of these cases so they can participate in a poll. And we are the only university in the United States to have this software tool and to be using it. It's highly used in the UK, in Ireland, in Australia, and New Zealand. And so students can actually foster some international connections by clicking on a case or a poll, just playing around and answering, but they can also start to engage with people across the globe in different cultures to see what they have to say on the issue. So there's a lot of opportunity here and a lot of potential with it. Yep. No, this is not the ones that I've posted. I'll show you that in just a minute here. These change daily because there are some pretty heavy users. This one is my case, but I'm a fairly heavy user at this point. But these change daily. One of the professors in New Zealand who is in nursing, who I've actually connected with, and by the way, met Faith over in a conference in Germany or Denmark 2 years ago, something like that, and said, I met your colleague. But she does a poll of the day every day for her classes. And so it's constantly changing and so forth. So this is the public site. What you can do is you can make this private site. And so this is my private site for one of my classes. This is for my HPR 215 class, which is an undergraduate Introduction to Public Health class. It's private in the sense that only my students have access to the site. If they participate in polls or cases, only they can participate in it, so no one from the outside can join in. It is private, so it is somewhat like our classroom inside a classroom. And so I make this for the purpose of my classes so I can assess, and I have assignments I'll explain in just a bit. So you can actually set up this private classroom. You can assign people to the classroom as well as invite. There's a huge opportunity here to connect internationally. The colleague I mentioned over in New Zealand who teaches in the nursing department, I actually did 2 years ago. I connected with her class and we did a case study together where her 25 students and my students, my 15 students, we worked together on a case and students were able to chat back and forth. And of course, the students got a kick out of the different spellings and the different way they said things online, but it was a real nice opportunity to collaborate overseas for us to connect and see different views. And that really is the underlying point of the values exchange, is that even though we're in the same profession, we can have very different values. And how did those values translate into our decisions? Because it's a common practice that we presume that we're in the same profession, we have the same values. We respect life, we want the best outcomes for our patients, and so forth. Whereas that's an assumption that often leads to conflict, especially in the workplace. So registration is free for students that they join on this site here. You could do a number of different things. You can use cases and polls that are already made, or you can make up your own. So you have a number of things you can do on this website. Most often I do a case study, and I'm going to show you an example of what I do with the case study, but I can use someone else's, or I make up my own, which I do often. You could do surveys, you could do a poll, which is a great do now activity. You want students to come prepared for class, you give them a quick poll. What do you think about, so for example, the right to die? Strongly agree or disagree. And it's just a way to get students engaged pretty immediately. And so this is something you can certainly assign before class, or even if students bring their technology right during the beginning of class. So polls are a really quick introduction that you can do. You can do conferences, you can have quizzes there, you can have your own discussion board, very similar to Blackboard. I tend to stay with the case, the survey, and the polls, even though these are options for you. So here's an example of what the poll looks like. It's just a quick strongly agree or disagree, just to kind of get things started for us. The case study, on the other hand, is a little bit more detailed. You can make your own case studies. And so I meant for this text to be small because I didn't necessarily want you to read it, but I want to give you the sense that you can write as much as you want. And so this is what I do for my cases. I present a very kind of detailed background. It usually supplements our text reading and assigned readings. Sometimes I will say in here, or you can see here, you must use the reading assignments to answer this question. So you do have a lot of freedom to develop what you want to develop. And so this case study, mandatory HIV vaccination for college entry, was a topic because, of course, vaccinations are a nice ethical issue in public health. But it's also not so much, it tackles vaccinations, but it also brings into our values and moral beliefs because it's talking about behavior. So sexual behavior often stems when we think about HIV. And so it's really getting at a number of different issues with students. And so you could develop a pretty long or a very short case study. Sometimes, people just post one kind of proposal and students will respond to this. Other case studies that I've used, you could do anything. I've done, we should increase tobacco to age 21 in all states. We should ban football because it leads to concussion and CTE. I mean, it could be anything down the line. In fact, students can eventually move to making their case studies and posting themselves. That is my kind of culminating project for my class. After going through a semester of giving case studies to students, students will then present a case study, they will post it, and their peers will respond to their proposal, and they'll be kind of responsible for justifying their decisions and engaging in a dialogue, trying to come to a kind of a common ground or a consensus, we should say. So this is what you do when you take a look at this case study. Students will press respond, and they'll be led through a series of interactive screens to help them understand where they stand on this position. The first screen is called the basics, and this is essentially asking students, do you agree or disagree? If we talk about presenting this case study in a classroom environment, most students will say, oh, I agree. Well, why? Oh, I don't know, I just do. There's not that opportunity to think deeply about why we agree or disagree. And so this screen right off the bat says, do you agree or disagree? And then it speaks to who matters most. So it's asking students to identify an important factor in their stance. You can see here that not only do you mark these answers, but you have an opportunity to answer an open-ended question. What do you mean and why did you choose this? So students are not only selecting, but then they have the opportunity to engage and explain their stance. After answering the basics, we go to the second screen, and this is known as reactions. Students will identify their reaction to the case, and they get to choose from a number of different options, 6 different reactions. They don't have to choose all the reactions. They choose the ones that they feel most strongly about. So we have ideals, emotions, hopes, duty, fears, and rights. And so for the sake of this presentation, I clicked on all of them to show you the pie chart. For this one here, I clicked on fear, and it asks you questions specific to that reaction. What is your biggest fear? How confident are you that this fear can be avoided by the case study? And then you have an opportunity to explain in a little bit more detail. If we click on, let's say, emotions, it asks different questions. How do you react emotionally to the case? Having an opportunity to explain. So each case study, students will have different pies, and they have an opportunity to think about their reactions and what this case brings up for them and what they feel their duty is and their hope and ideal and what rights are infringed and so forth. So it's allowing students to critically think about their stance and encourages them to take a more deeper approach to just agree or disagree. Nope, those are all standardized. These 3 screens are the 3 frames you go through. Yeah, so this was based, this reaction screen, on the Ring of Confidence, which is a values-based kind of decision-making, going back to the theory. Essentially, it's asking us what is important and how confident I am about this decision. We'll get there. So there is a little bit of theory behind these screens, and it was known as the Ring of Confidence. Sounds ominous. And then the last screen that we get to, so we answered the basics, we answered what is our reaction, and now we're getting into our reasoning. And so the reasoning is aligned with this ethical grid, which is another values-based kind of fundamental. And it's asking students once again to clarify their reasons. They can choose on one of 16 options. They can choose 2 out of the 16. They can choose 3 out of the 16. They simply have an opportunity to go through and recognize what their reaction is. So I clicked on the health grid cell there, and you could see that it's going to have a kind of a question for each of these processes, and also an opportunity to explain why you feel the way you feel. So they have an opportunity to clarify, to go kind of through the gamut and so forth. So students can go back and forth. So in the beginning, if they said, I strongly agree with this case, and then they get to that last screen, it's been shown that about 5% of students change their mind by the time they get through this. So they have an opportunity to go back, or they want to go and change an ideal or one of their feelings. So they have that luxury of kind of fluctuating between those 3 screens. It doesn't really take a long time to get through, even though it can, especially if students are thinking deeply and sharing their opinions. Students at the end, before you submit, have this box that pops up that says, what are alternate ways to deal with this issue? So students just don't simply agree or disagree. They now have an opportunity to kind of expand and say, well, it might be better, or I might agree with this if, and they have an opportunity to present their ideas on the case proposal. You also have the option of adding your own questions to the end. So those 3 questions, the basics, don't go slow, The basics, the reactions are three. These show up in every case study. Those are the three frames. You can add your own questions at the end. So if you wanted to throw in there something to assess if they did the reading or how it applies to a reading, if you want to ask them anything else, you can certainly do that. So there's a lot of freedom with that. So now that students have completed their case study, they've submitted, there's a number of things that you can do. A screen similar to this pops up where students can then see how they responded to others. This is where the real magic happens. They can actually go to the quotes page where they can read everything that their classmates read, and they have an opportunity to reply and to comment. There's actually a like button. So there's that opportunity for interaction and engagement here. So students will engage in a dialogue online and doing so in a pretty deep way. Yes. With this tool, and I'll speak about that in just a bit, they can use their real name or they can use a pseudonym if they prefer. For my classes, I ask them to use their real name because I assess them on this. But in theory, if we just wanted to get authentic discussions, students can use a pseudonym so that they can really engage without fear of being identified. I haven't used that yet. I make sure that everyone's... But that's a possibility. One of the neat functions about this is we can collect aggregate data, so we can collect class statistics on a case study, and that's really where the magic happens inside a classroom. So students will come back to class, and here we sit, and I can show them a number of different things about how they reported. We can click on the poll function, which will just tell us the distribution of how students responded. You could see if this hypothetical HIV vaccination was available. I made it mandatory for college entry. We had the majority of our students strongly agree with this. Only 21% disagreed with this. You can also see as a function who disagreed and who agreed and so forth, so you can click on their name and see their reasons why. This is pretty useful, for the disagree. We could see that 21%, well, why did they disagree? What were their viewpoints? Is this something that I can make an argument for or something I agree with? We can click on the reactions function, and this can be very insightful. You have a number of different pie charts that show up that kind of sum up what the class reaction was. You could see that we have some stronger pies than others. You can organize this by agreement. So those who agreed and disagreed, what was their distribution of reactions? So we can do a number of things according to this. We can also take a look at reasons, and again, we can see what common responses there were across agreement as well as everybody here. So in this chart, you could see who matters most. We had the effectiveness as one of the higher ones. Everyone, fairness was down quite a bit. But you can assess and you could start a conversation about why we chose what we chose and so forth. Yep. Yeah. Facts. No one cared about facts. Yeah. Evidence-based, right? Yeah. Undergrads, sophomores. Yeah. So, which, by the way, I always ask, what are the 5 ways that HIV is transmitted? Never get it. It's in the readings, but they're also 20-year-olds and in the health professions, and so, yeah. But it could lead to some really interesting things, just like that. Why was our facts considered so low? When we think about who matters most, why was facts not considered, and why was our emotion and why these other things come into play? So it really is a very teachable moment, especially when we start to talk about values interfering with our decision making. Where's my?
You find students are more willing to share when it's online versus in a classroom?
100%. 100%. And I'll talk about my research on this and a little bit about how students felt on that. Not only do I make that as part of their assignment, so all students must participate, but I find even the quiet students who rarely participate are very active. They go above and beyond just responding once or twice. So it really does give a voice to the quiet students or students who don't feel comfortable having their opinions heard or might avoid that confrontation. Anne-Marie.
So Jen, it was timely because I got an email last night teaching capstone class.
Hey,
cool.
Yep.
And I have one of my really good students letting me know that when I told them there's class participation, which is 10%,
Mm-hmm.
there's a rubric for what they get.
Sure.
Which is we use the readings just by position.
Yep.
There's apparently a little bit of a backlash because of differences in cultures and people who feel
Correct.
that they should have a discussion board so they don't have to talk in a group.
Mm-hmm.
and have conversations and have discussions. So on the one hand, I love this option, but at the same time, if I'm talking about giving them skills that they will need in the workplace
Sure.
to make them to really succeed,
Mm-hmm.
then I'm thinking about this as an option,
Sure.
but I'm going to have to get them outside their comfort zone.
Sure.
And so that's why I hear what Rosemary's saying too, and so maybe giving them that option, but they've got to learn to be able to speak in
Sure,
and
sure.
be comfortable.
Absolutely. And I think that's this site certainly has that opportunity where you can say, oh, Anne Marie, I noticed that this was your stance. Can you talk about that some more? It kind of is maybe us calling on someone, but it starts that conversation. I think that's true that it is difficult from a teaching standpoint to penalize, especially when some students have crippling social anxiety or some other issues going on. But if we're preparing them for the workplace, then they need to be able to step out of that. And so this might be a nice medium to encourage that.
But they
Yeah.
want A's.
Oh, well.
I'm
That,
not saying
yeah.
they're not going to get points, but they may not get an A in participation. So
Yeah.
this is where I
Sure.
understand as a clinician too, but I have to get them. You're fine. You'll still pass the class, but you may not get an A.
Sure.
Because you do need all these skills.
Right. Right. Of course. Sure. Yeah. No. Understand. Sure. Great. Another thing that you could do on the values exchange here, just finishing up with reports and what you can make, you could pull up this function that's called consensus, and you could see how much in agreement the class was. And this can be one of the more telling aspects of the tool. Just because everyone agrees doesn't mean we're in consensus about why we agree. And just because we all disagree doesn't mean that we don't have a high level of consensus. We just might have differing values. So this is where we were talking about that. It is presumed that in a single discipline or even in a class that we would answer in similar ways or that our values would be the same. So this really highlights the fact that even though we disagree on a position, our values might very well be in alignment. We just have different kind of beliefs coming into play and so forth. So the consensus button is nice. Something else you could do with students is you click on the compare button and a student will be matched with someone who disagreed or agreed. They had opposite views, and it matches line for line what they said, so then they can start to engage. So it facilitates that, let's get into a discussion piece. So it is a very neat website here. So how I use this function in class is that I set up these case studies periodically throughout the semester. We don't meet in class because this is their online assignment. When I use this in class, I'm not quite at a hybrid level yet because it's only 3-4 times over the course of the semester. But I give them the day off of class and I ask students to respond to a case study by a certain date and time. And then students must go back after completing and respond to 2 of their classmates. So they must engage. So it's kind of forced interaction. And they must engage in a meaningful way. So they like or say, oh, I agree. They must add additional evidence. They must ask a probing question. They must offer constructive feedback. They have to engage in a way that kind of moves the conversation forward. I've used it in the past that students complete a report analysis. So as I was going through, what was the numbers for the poll? What percentage consensus were we? What was the main reactions that you saw? Why do you think that way? So I can hand out a report analysis and ask students to take a look at the aggregate data and start to make some kind of to take a look about why we answered the way we did. And also, this is a great tool for introducing a topic, for reinforcing concepts, and also for closure. So after we learn something, kind of putting it all together in real life practice. I've used this before as a catalyst for a current event. I've given a case study, and then students must come to class with a relevant current event. Maybe not necessarily on HIV or something else, but they might bring about the measles outbreak, or they might bring something relevant. So it's expanding upon this. And really, what other policies out there have we done? And so forth. So it could be used in a number of different ways, and I'd be happy to share with you the number of ways, but the possibilities are really endless here. And yeah, this is my rubric about how I assess. And so I ask them to, or I assess on the quality of the content, how thoughtfully and thoroughly did they answer questions, did they complete all questions, did they write in English and not use grammar and spelling, punctuation, because this is a classroom, it's not just online. Timeliness, and then their response to others, just like I said, I ask them to respond, not just in a simple fashion, but to make it meaningful. So when I give these case studies, I go through, it's very easy to grade students according to this, and it's very transparent for students what is expected on this site. So I do want to explain the last 10 minutes here how I've evaluated this tool, and I've done so in formal research. The first one took place in the fall of 2013, and this was the first time that I've used the values exchange in a class. And this was with my students enrolled in the undergraduate 200 level public health course. I had a total of 17 students participate, and essentially I was just looking to see how did the tool do? Did it enhance learning? Did students like it? What was their feedback on this? And so I had 3 research questions. I asked them I wanted to know how do students perceive the software tool? I wanted to know how do students feel about the online environment, especially discussing these kind of controversial, heavy ethical topics. And then in what ways did the software program assist them in learning, if any? So those were 3 straightforward questions that I asked. So the basic methodology for this is that I presented I gave a lecture in class, and we had a discussion, so we introduced ethics in a topic. I had students respond to 2 ethical issues during the course of the semester. So one was on HPV vaccine, the other one was on a fat tax, and so students engaged in this. After they were finished with it, I asked them to respond to a 10-question open-ended survey where we analyzed both quantitatively and qualitatively, and these were some of the results I wanted to share with you. So 100% of students said that it enhanced their learning, and so some of the written feedback I received was the software seemed like a different version of Facebook, which provided the abilities to help one discover important facts about many different health issues. Another student said under this kind of field, I feel that it is an interesting way to get students to be able to communicate with others on their views of public health. It helps to increase my learning ability on the topic we're discussing. So I had some really positive feedback from these 17 students, this very kind of case study type class. I asked about the online environment. What did students think about this? And most of the students, 86%, felt that the software program was pretty easy to use and friendly. It was pretty simple. If they made a mistake, the software program directs you. So I gave them supplemental instructions. I trained them for one day in the computer lab. So they were well prepared, and most students thought the program was pretty straightforward for the most part. I also asked about how did you feel using your name as opposed to using a pseudonym? How do you feel about actually owning your stance and opinion? And students said that they felt pretty comfortable with that. Maybe that's the generation gap, but students enjoyed being able to put their opinion down, and it gives others a chance to read their views, but they could also read another view. So again, some pretty positive feedback about using their names. It didn't really seem to be a hindrance to expressing what they truly felt. And then lastly, did this program enhance their learning or assist in their decision making? And again, we had some really good results. 96% of students said that they thought it really did help them. I think I had one student who was just saying no to everything, and you know. But students said some interesting things. I love it when students say, you know, it makes you feel pretty good when they say, it challenged me to think more objectively, especially seeing people in other countries and how they responded. So they seem to enjoy that option. It's, you know, one student says, it allows you to think deeper, and during this process, you realize how strongly you feel about certain issues. So this program isn't about changing our minds, it's about being able to robustly justify our decisions, to feel confident about where you stand, but also have the opportunity to say, well, where does everyone else come from too? What is the other side of the table in a pretty safe format? So this led to the development of a new course. I was an Ethics 2 fellow during the summer of 2014. I really enjoyed teaching the ethics, and so that led me to develop a new course. It was called Ethical Issues in Public Health. It was a graduate level course, and one of the strong points about this course was that I used the values exchange. We used this case study software tool as a supplement, but it really was kind of what the course was built around, using the software program. And we're moving toward making this a permanent course, hopefully in the next few months. And so I did my second research on the graduate level. What did those graduate students think about this here? I assumed that they would have different viewpoints. So I had 9 students in the summer enrolled in HPR 580, the ethical issues topic, and I pretty much wanted to know the same thing. My methodology was a little bit different. I had students participate in 5 ethical case studies across the course of the semester. I asked them to participate in a focus group. I wasn't the one leading it because I was the instructor, but I had one of my GAs lead it. And I also asked them to respond to a 10-question survey getting at 4 different constructs. I wanted to know, did it enhance their knowledge? Did it enhance student engagement? Were students satisfied with the learning experience, and how usable was the software program? And so just quickly here, my results, again, were pretty good here. Out of a score of 5 on a Likert scale, you could see here that I had high marks in student knowledge, engagement, satisfaction, and usability. Of course, this was only 9 students in my class, a lot of room for to replicate this and so forth, but I was pretty happy with the results that students found it meaningful. And some of the kind of more anecdotal evidence that I have is that students wrote, writing my thoughts helped me to explain myself and critically think through issues. It allowed me to view and consider people who I may or may not agree with. I really found it's sometimes easier to be quiet and avoid confrontation than to speak your opinion. I felt like my voice was heard. And then prior to this class, I never really conceptualized my values and beliefs. So we had some nice feedback with this as well. And so some of the future uses I see with this, and one of the reasons why I did want to present at Innovations, is that, number one, this software tool really does promote kind of the strategic plan of the university, kind of developing a common ground among students, but also fostering a global perspective. I think there's a lot of interdisciplinary potential with this program. So not only did I develop an ethical elective course in my program based around this, but there's certainly opportunity for collaboration. Let's get our classes together and answer a case study and kind of see what the other, what the other discipline is thinking and feeling. So a lot of opportunity for collaboration, not only within our university, but go ahead and make connections over in Ireland or New Zealand. Just send an email and people are happy to do that, like I did with the New Zealand case. So certainly we can foster some international connections, which is always wonderful for students. One thing I did want to mention is that Marymount is part of this interprofessional education project using the Values Exchange. You could see here that this is a screen capture of the website, so we have a whole group with this. I am a part of this. I am, like I said, I reached out to David Seedhouse, the founder of the Values Exchange, and asked for his permission. He's been wonderful, and he asked us to participate, being we're the only university, higher education institution in the United States to use this tool. And essentially, this is a project that's in development. The main question is, can interprofessional education enhance collaborations between different disciplines and produce better outcomes? And so essentially, we want to foster a sense of collaboration and negotiating the decision-making process across disciplines, but one that reflects true real life. As we get into our professions, we're going to have to work with others. And how are we going to negotiate and balance and come to good decisions interactively? And so essentially what this project will include is that we're in the developmental stages of a 6-week learning program that will be delivered to participants in 16 higher education institutions. We are one of those 16 institutions. Other institutions are all over the UK, Ireland. There's one NHS trust, which is the acute hospital in UK, most likely, right? And essentially we're going to ask students to take a 6-week course that requires about 2 hours a week of their time, and to see if this values exchange actually does lead to better kind of collaboration and negotiating to come to an agreement. It also is a nice place to realize that even though we're in the same profession and even though we're in the same discipline, that we might have different values. And recognizing those values is the first step, because then, only then can we engage in meaningful conversation, when we appreciate where other people are coming from, and even recognize where our stance comes from. So we're in the fund-seeking phase. We're actually piloting the program currently over in Dublin, Ireland. So students are engaging in this process, and we're getting feedback on the programs, course setup, and so forth. So there is this opportunity as well. So unbelievably, I finished in 44 minutes, but I did want to take some time for questions. I wish we had about 10 more minutes for questions, but I did want to give that to you. Brian? Yep. Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't show, but doesn't look to see if there's growth within the discussion or the class. Part of what, when I would guess what the goal, you get up and you see these students reacting so strongly with emotions, it's not surprising for your undergraduate.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things we want to move them to is that you need to be able to continue with other things and then should move them.
Sure.
It might be, I don't use the word wrong, you may not be on the side of the vaccination debate.
Mm-hmm.
That you should be giving your values, perhaps your values are skewed because of your
Right.
19-year-oldness and maturity.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so is there a way for us to
Yes.
use this to help them move stuff?
Yes, absolutely. There's some new features here. I'm clicking on my profile. What we can do for each student, they have their own profile. They could have the minimal information on here. But it also is a neat feature because it tracks how you responded to all case studies. And do you have common trends in your values? Do you always put duty first? Or do you always emphasize this first? So there is that option to reflect upon how you've answered across the board, if that changes or if you're consistent with your values. And I think it does, probably a little less measured objectively, have the opportunity to expose students to viewpoints they might not have been exposed to. And hopefully that will move them to consider others kind of in that mature way that you're speaking about. Or perhaps for us to talk about moving forward and thinking a little bit more critically instead of the same every time. So students can reflect how they answered. It's their profile, and the idea behind this is that students can then say, well, I'm all about rights, and this is kind of where my stance is for most case studies. So kind of recognizing why they answer what they answer. So maybe that's a feature that would assist with that process. Yeah. Yep. Yes. Yep. Across the board. Sure. All right. I appreciate your time, and if you're looking to work, yeah, I'm certainly open to collaboration or even kind of engaging in some more research with this. I'm happy to expand upon that. It's been very well received. I presented at 2 national conferences, so there does seem to be some interest in this field. So if you were kind of interested in this and wanted to collaborate, I'm more than happy to share with you the things I've done.